The funeral was meant to be a quiet farewell, but it erupted into a scene of unforgettable chaos. Every soul in the church froze as the massive police German Shepherd climbed into the little girl's coffin. At first, the officers believed he was simply confused, lost in his grief, unable to part with the one child who had shown him kindness. But a ripple of panic turned into a wave when the canine gently pressed his head against her small chest and refused to stir. The room. Screams shattered the silence. They thought he had lost his mind. His handlers tried to pull him away, but he growled a sound he had never made in his entire career. A hushed voice asked, "Why is he acting this way? And why does he keep nudging?" her hand as if pleading for her to wake up. He knew a truth no one else could see. He was sounding an alarm, but for what? The mourners were lost in confusion. He snarled at anyone who dared to approach his grief, a storm raging deeper than anyone could have imagined. They all believed it was just a tragic farewell. And then he began to claw frantically at the coffin, whimpering and barking, tearing at the wood as if trying to excavate a life. Her parents were frozen in shock. Whispers of confusion spread through the mourners. One officer, his voice trembling, murmured, "Why won't he leave her side? What does he sense?" Just then her mother collapsed to her knees, and a question spread like wildfire through the room. Why is he acting as if she's still alive? No one had an answer. The loyal canine was trying to tell them something, a truth no one was prepared to face. What unfolded next would stun them all. Before we continue, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. I'm genuinely curious, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country's name in the comments. I love to see how far our stories travel. The funeral home was submerged in a deep silence, not the serene, kind, but a heavy, suffocating stillness that clung to every soul and refused to release its grip. Rows of grieving faces filled the pews, their expressions etched with a mixture of disbelief and profound sorrow. No one could truly accept what they were witnessing. No one believed they should be gathered here, saying a final farewell to a child who had not even begun to learn her own name. In the center of the room, bathed in the soft glow of a chandelier, rested a small white coffin adorned with delicate lace. Within lay a little girl no older than 5 years old, her golden curls framing her angelic face. She appeared to be merely sleeping, a picture of peace untouched by the cruel fate that had claimed her life too soon. A soft pink dress adorned her small frame, and a pearl bracelet encircled her wrist, a gift from her mother only weeks before. But it wasn't the girl who held the crowd in stunned silence. It was the massive German Shepherd nestled inside the coffin beside her. His powerful frame was curled protectively around her tiny body, his head resting gently on her shoulder. A final, loyal vigil. His dark, glassy eyes were filled with an unbearable sorrow, shifting only when someone dared to draw near. A low rumble vibrated deep in his chest, a clear warning to keep their distance. It wasn't aggression, it was heartbreak, and no one had the strength to pull him away. Sharp gasps cut through the solemn air. Mothers covered their mouths in shock. Fathers fought to hold back tears. Even hardened officers in full dress uniform stood frozen, uncertain of what to do. This was unprecedented. No canine had ever acted this way. Not at a funeral, not ever. The little girl's parents were frozen at a distance, powerless to draw any closer. Her mother shook uncontrollably, clinging to her husband's arm as silent, gut-wrenching sobs racked her body. Her father just stared his mind, refusing to accept the scene before him. Their little girl and the devoted dog who would not let her go. Officer Blake, standing toward the back, felt a cold dread creep up his spine. He was the one who had answered the call that awful night. He had witnessed the dogs. Heartbreak heard those desperate howls and watched the animal refuse to leave her side, but nothing could have prepared him for this moment. A funeral was meant to be the final farewell. But the dog's actions spoke of something else, a silent denial, as if he knew this wasn't goodbye. And deep in his soul, Blake felt a disturbing truth beginning to surface in his own heart. Something about this solemn service was profoundly wrong. Murmurs spread through the chapel as mourners stared at the German shepherd, with a mix of stunned disbelief and heartbreaking sorrow. No matter how softly they called his name, no matter how gently, they tried to coax him away. The dog would not budge a single inch, his body rising and falling with slow, pained breaths. But his gaze remained locked on the little girl's peaceful face. Each time someone dared to approach the casket, he would lift his head and let out a low, warning rumble, not of aggression, but of pure, desperate devotion. Officer Daniels, a senior officer, cautiously stepped forward. "Easy now, boy," Hitya murmured, holding his hands out to soothe him. But as he drew near the casket, the dog's ears flattened, and he bared, his teeth just enough, pressing his head closer to the girl's shoulder, shielding her, standing his eternal guard, refusing to let anyone break their bond. Daniels retreated slowly, deeply shaken. "He won't let us near her." A wave of unease washed over the room. People traded worried glances. Some wept harder, unable to witness the unwavering loyalty of an animal who still believed he had a duty to protect. A dog grieving for a child was crushing enough to see, but this was more than grief. It was instinct. It was a promise, as if the dog sensed a truth that the rest of them could not. The funeral director, an older man with shaky hands, wiped the sweat from his forehead. "We've never witnessed anything like it," he whispered. "He's been this way since she arrived. He won't eat. He won't drink a drop of water. He just lies there, his eyes fixed on her." From his place at the back, Blake watched. The dog Shadow had worked with him on cases. Blake knew his discipline, his obedience, his razor-sharp intelligence. A canine trained to the highest standard doesn't just disobey an order, he doesn't ignore a familiar voice, and he certainly doesn't break protocol at a funeral, so why this nearby? A woman cried softly. "He just loved her so much," she whispered to her friend. She used to give him treats through the fence. They were absolutely inseparable. The woman next to her nodded, but a shadow of fear crossed her face. "But why is he acting like this? It's almost like he's warning us." Suddenly, Shadow's head shot up, his ears twitching, his gaze sweeping the room. Searching, analyzing, and then he froze, every muscle in his body rigid. His breathing grew rapid. He locked his eyes on someone standing with the officers. A deep guttural growl rose from his chest, low sustained and filled with a chilling fury. The room fell silent. No one understood why, reacted, but a cold dread gripped Blake's heart. This wasn't grief, it was an accusation. All eyes in the room slowly turned toward the source of Shadow's growl. The officers lining the wall went rigid, exchanging tense, uncertain glances. But the shepherd wasn't confused or acting randomly. His gaze was a weapon locked with a laser-like intensity on one man and one man alone, Officer Raymond Cole. Cole was a statue among his fellow officers, his back ramrod straight, his jaw clenched like a vice. He was known for his calm, a man admired for his discipline. But now, under the crushing weight of Shadow's stare, something fractured on his face. A fleeting, nervous twitch, a fissure in his stoic expression. He shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his perfectly straight tie. A hushed murmur swept the crowd like a chilling wind. Why is the dog staring at him like that? Does he know him? What's going on? Blake's eyes narrowed. Shadow never reacted this way without cause. He wasn't a dog who startled, and he never growled without a damn good reason. His training was built on identifying danger, on sensing deceit, on reading the unspoken. And right now his entire being was screaming a single silent message. Something about Officer Cole wasn't right. Shadow pressed his head firmly against the girl's side, a living shield protecting her from the man across the room. His ears flattened, a sure sign of distress. His powerful muscles trembled, not from fear, but from sheer restraint. He yearned to move to confront, yet he stayed by the child, torn between his devotion and his instinct. Cole cleared his throat, a failed attempt to sound steady. "What's wrong with that dog?" he asked, forcing a laugh that cracked in the heavy air. "He's acting like I did something." His attempt at humor fell, completely flat in the silence. No one smiled. Blake took a small step forward, watching Cole with the trained eye of a man who had interrogated countless suspects. The officer avoided eye contact with the casket. His gaze kept darting to the Yaika exit, his fingers drumming a restless beat on his belt. Shadow growled again, deeper this time. Cole flinched. That tiny reaction was seen by everyone. A murmur passed through the officers. Daniels moved closer to Blake and whispered, "You're seeing this right?" Blake nodded slowly, his gut twisting into a knot. Shadow wasn't aggressive. If anything, his calm was legendary. But now he acted as if Cole carried a scent he couldn't abide, one he associated with danger, with threat, with guilt. Cole's voice finally cracked. "Somebody get that animal under control." Blake's eyebrows shot up. Animals don't lie. Dogs don't accuse without cause. And Shadow, a highly trained K9, had just called out a police officer at a child's funeral. Something was profoundly wrong. Long before this solemn funeral, long before the tragedy that fractured an entire community, Shadow was just a disciplined and exceptionally trained police dog assigned to Officer Blake. He was strong, fearless, and focused until the day he met a little girl with golden curls and a pure smile that could melt the hardest of hearts. It was on a routine afternoon patrol. Blake had stopped in a quiet suburban neighborhood, checking on a string of break-ins reported that week. Shadow was working a scent along the sidewalk when he suddenly froze solid. Blake tensed, expecting danger, only to hear a soft giggle danced from behind a white picket fence. A tiny face peeked out from the bushes, a little girl who hardly reached Blake's waist, offering a crumbly cookie in her small hand. "Doggy," she chirped with delight. "You're the biggest puppy I've ever seen." Shadow, the very same dog who could neutralize armed assailants, sat down with perfect obedience, tilting his head with curiosity. The small girl approached without a hint of fear, gently placing the cookie in his powerful jaws. Blake was absolutely floored. Shadow never accepted food from a stranger, not once, but for her he shattered his own rules. From that day forward, the girl Lily waited for, Shadow and Blake, each afternoon. She would race out barefoot, her tiny palms filled with crumbs, waving frantically until Shadow trotted right over to her. It didn't matter that he was a K9. To her, he was just her shadow. She would wrap her small arms around his powerful neck, burying her face deep in his fur, giggling as he gently nudged her with his nose. Shadow, who was normally so stoic and reserved, simply melted around her. His tail would wag, his entire body would relax. His eyes shone with a warmth Blake had never witnessed before. Lily's mother once watched from the porch, a sad smile on her face. "She doesn't have a lot of friends," she admitted in a quiet voice. "She's always been so shy. But that dog, he brings something special out of her." Blake nodded as he watched the little girl weave wildflowers into Shadow's collar. "She's good for him too," he thought. Never seen him this at peace. As the months passed, their bond only deepened. Shadow listened to her voice with more focus than he gave Blake's own commands. If she cried, he would lie beside her until the tears stopped. If she laughed, he would rise to his paws, excited and watchful. And every single time Blake had to lead him away, Shadow would look back at her, a silent promise in his eyes that he would return. To Lily, Shadow was so much more than a dog. He was her guardian, her truest friend, her silent protector, and for Shadow, she was the one soul for whom he would give his very life. No one could have known then how crucial that bond would become, or the lengths Shadow would go to protect her, even from beyond the grave. The day Lily's life was cut short started like any other. Sunlight streamed through her bedroom curtains, birds were chirping outside, and her small feet tapped with excitement across the wood floor as she got ready to greet her most treasured visitor. Shadow and Officer Blake always passed by at the same time, a moment Lily would never dare to miss. Arrival. She tugged on her mother's sleeve, pleading to go wait outside. "Shadow's coming, I just know it," her mother chuckled, softly tying a pink ribbon into her daughter's curls. "All right, sweetheart, but you stay where I can see you." Lily nodded with great enthusiasm and skipped into the front yard, clutching a little bag of treats she had saved especially for him. But on that particular morning, Shadow and Blake never appeared. Blake would later explain they were rerouted to a robbery in a neighboring district. They had no way of knowing how that one small change in routine would shatter their world. Around noon, neighbors recalled seeing Lily playing by herself near the edge of the street, humming a little tune as she lined up her toys. She wasn't supposed to go beyond the mailbox, but a child's curiosity knows no such rules. A brightly colored ball slipped from her tiny hands, bouncing out towards the sidewalk. Lily chased after it with a soft laugh, completely unaware of the looming danger. A black SUV whipped onto the road, moving far faster than anyone would expect on such a quiet street. Witnesses would later testify it swerved as if the driver was distracted. From the porch, Lily's mother screamed her name, but the little girl never heard her. The SUV, the world lurched. Tires screamed. A sickening thud echoed down the street. When neighbors poured from their homes, Lily lay still on the pavement, her pink ribbon a lone flutter of life. Her mother crumpled beside her, a raw scream for help tearing through the air. The driver, a uniformed officer, emerged from the vehicle, pale and trembling. Officer Raymond Cole. He claimed he never saw her. He claimed she darted out. He claimed it was a terrible accident. Blake arrived moments later, his heart a frantic drum, as Shadow launched from the cruiser before it had fully stopped. The dog flew across the asphalt, whimpering mournfully, licking Lily's face, nudging her small hands, begging for a response. But Lily was gone. Shadow's howl then ripped through the neighborhood, a sound of pure heart-shattering anguish. Paramedics did everything they could. Her mother pleaded, wept, prayed, but nothing could bring her back. The official report was written. The incident was ruled accidental. The case was closed within hours. But even then, a cold doubt about Officer Cole's story settled deep in Blake's soul. Something was out of place. Something was deeply wrong, and Shadow, whose memory was forged in scent, would be the one to expose the truth. This was no mere accident. It was the start of a mystery far deeper and darker than anyone could have possibly imagined. In the heavy days that followed, the department tried to find its rhythm again. But a palpable weight lingered in the air, a shadow no one could escape. The report was signed the case, stamped accidental, and the file was neatly tucked away. But for those who were there, for those who had witnessed Shadow's profound grief, and for those who saw the cracks in the story, peace was impossible. Blake sat at his desk late one night, eyes fixed on the slim file before him. The official narrative was almost too clean, a perfect story. Lily ran into the street. Cole was driving under the speed limit. Every detail pointed to a tragic accident. But the story felt hollow, too neat, too carefully constructed. And the deeper Blake dug, the more his gut coiled into a knot. Why was Cole on that street at that exact moment? Why didn't his dashboard camera record the impact? And why did Shadow react to the officer with such furious recognition? He rubbed his jaw, exhaling slowly. Shadow slept under his desk, but his rest was tormented, twitching, whimpering and growling as if trapped in a nightmare only he could see. Across the room, Officer Daniels entered quietly, shutting the door behind him. "Blake," he said, his voice low, "I heard you were pulling the file again." Blake hesitated, then gave a slow nod. Daniels let out a weary sigh. "You're not the only one with doubts." He placed another file on Blake's desk. "I pulled Cole's driving logs. Something's off. His route that day doesn't match his report. He had no reason to be anywhere near Lily Street. Blake's eyes narrowed. Then why was he there? That's the million-dollar question, Daniels murmured, his voice dropping. He refused to answer anything beyond the bare minimum. Claimed he was following a lead, but there's no record of it anywhere. Blake's stomach sank even lower. He scanned the pages again. Several neighbors recalled seeing that police SUV earlier in the morning, circling the block, slowing down, pausing at corners. Cole denied everything. And then there was the missing footage. The dash cam had conveniently powered down just minutes before the collision. Cole claimed it was a malfunction, yet there was no service request for any repair history, not a single prior complaint. Cameras simply don't fail on their own. Daniels leaned in. Shadow. He knows something, Blake. He sees Cole as a danger. A dog's instinct doesn't lie. As if summoned by the thought, Shadow's head snapped up. Up ears erect, a low rumble vibrating deep in his chest. He stared at the door to the hall beyond, as if feeling the presence of the man they were just discussing. Blake exchanged a grim look with Daniels. It wasn't just that their report was wrong. Something was being deliberately hidden. And whatever that secret was, Shadow knew it all along. He had barely moved a muscle since the funeral began. He lay by Lily's coffin, a sentinel sculpted from sorrow. No food, no water, only the slow rise and fall. Of his chest showed he was still breathing. Blake remained close, a silent guardian, hoping against hope the loyal dog would find his peace. But Shadow's eyes remained distant, locked on something beyond their world. Then it happened just as dawn broke on the second day of the viewing. The vast hall held only Blake, Shadow, and the janitor sweeping silently in a distant corner. Blake knelt down, his fingers gently combing through Shadow's fur. "Buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "you can't stay like this." Shadow didn't turn, but instead pressed his nose against Lily's hand in a final heartbreaking goodbye. Then he moved. A slow lift of his head, a deliberate shift of his weight stepping away from her side with a mournful ache that made Blake's own heart crack. It was the first time in almost 40 hours he'd left her side. But instead of falling from exhaustion, Shadow stood alert, nose testing the air, ears swiveling with a sudden, unmistakable purpose. Blake frowned. "Shadow, what is it?" Shadow strode to the exit, then paused, turning back to Blake with an urgent stare. He barked. It was short, sharp, demanding. Not a cry of grief, not a plea for help, but a command. Shadow darted to the door once more, now pawing at it, whining with pure impatience. The janitor jumped, startled by the abrupt change in the room's energy. Blake rose, a surge of tension flooding his veins. You want me to follow?" Shadow's second bark was his answer. Blake didn't need a third signal. He grabbed his coat, shoved the heavy door open, and let Shadow lead the way. His dog sprinted down the hallway with a focused fury nose, skimming the floor, weaving as if following an invisible thread he had memorized. Every muscle in his body quivered with urgency. They burst from the funeral home into the biting morning air. Shadow didn't hesitate. He shot down the pavement, rounded the corner, and charged straight into the residential neighborhood that was once Lily's home. A chill traced its way up Blake's arms. Asterisk Shadow. What is this asterisk? The dog stopped dead in the middle of the street. His body went rigid, tail dropping. A growl started deep, low, and lethal. Blake followed. The line of Shadow's stare, and his blood ran cold. Parked at the end of the street, partially concealed by bushes, was the exact same black SUV from the day that Lily died. It was Officer Cole's. Shadow stalked forward, hackles raised. For the first time, the realization hit Blake. Shadow didn't leave her side to mourn. He left her side to find the truth. And Blake stood, frozen, his eyes locked on the black SUV like a ghost from a nightmare. The vehicle remained silent and still at the curb, cold and lifeless, its windows blacked out. Shadow growled again, creeping forward, his nose twitching, confirming the one scent. He felt a dread he knew all too well. Blake's heart hammered in his chest. "What is it, boy? What are you showing me?" he whispered. Shadow nosed the driver's door insistently, then spun around his bark, a sharp, urgent command that cut through the silence. Blake swallowed hard against a rising fear. If the SUV was here, Cole had to be close. But why in the world was he hiding? He called Daniels immediately. Within minutes, 2 squad cars arrived. Daniels got out, his gaze narrowing at the sight of the SUV. "That's Cole's truck," he muttered. "But he's supposed to be off the clock today." Shadow tugged hard on Blake's pant leg, pulling him toward Lily's home. Blake's stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. "He wants us to go inside," he said, his voice strained. To the side gate and a basement door hanging slightly ajar. "That door, it shouldn't be open," Daniels noted grimly. Lily's parents were out of town for the service. No one had any business being in there. Daniels frowned. "We need probable. Cause to search." A sound echoed from within, cutting him off. A soft thump, a faint shuffle. Shadow lunged, barking furiously, trying to force his way inside. Blake didn't waste a single moment. He threw the door wide open. The basement was dimly lit, filled with forgotten boxes and childhood toys. But Shadow wasn't tracking a scent. He was making a beeline for the home, surveillance system against the far wall. Blake's breath hitched in his throat. One monitor was still glowing. Someone had been watching the footage. Daniels moved closer, his eyes wide as he rewound the recording. "This is from the day Lily passed," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Look at the screen." Lily was playing so happy in the yard. The video should have shown her running toward the street, but instead something else appeared. Cole's SUV creeping down the block far earlier than he had ever claimed. Shadow let out a sharp whine as Daniels slowed the playback. Cole wasn't distracted. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't even looking forward. His eyes were glued to his phone. A string of text messages, one after another. Someone had been giving him orders. Blake's jaw tightened until it ached. He lied. And then the truth unfolded. Lily never ran into the road. She stopped. She looked up, her mouth forming a word. Then she recoiled, stepping back in shock, as Cole's SUV swerved directly at her. Daniels slammed a fist on the table. "This was no accident." Shadow barked once in harsh agreement, his intense gaze locked on the monitor. But the worst was yet to come. A second figure appeared at the edge of the frame. Just a flicker of a shadow, a whisper of movement. Someone else had been there, and that person had wanted Lily gone. By the time the sun sank below the rooftops, the precinct was buzzing with hushed, urgent whispers. Blake and Daniels had delivered the newly unearthed footage, and the truth was spreading like a raging fire. For the first time since Lily's death, officers were questioning the one man they had all trusted implicitly. Officer Raymond Cole. Cole sat in interview room 3, his fingers drumming, a nervous rhythm on the cold steel table. His uniform was immaculate, but his face told the truth, sweat beading. Beneath his collar, a muscle in his jaw twitching relentlessly. He kept glancing at the door, waiting for someone to tell him. He was free to leave, but no one came. Blake entered a tablet under his arm. Shadow followed leash taut his body, rigid with purpose. The dog's eyes locked onto Cole, narrowing instantly. His growl wasn't loud, not like at the funeral, but it was a low, controlled, and dangerous sound. Cole stiffened in his chair. "Get that dog out of here," he snapped. "I don't feel safe. In here." Blake paid him no mind taking a seat. "Funny," he murmured. "Shadow's never had an issue with anyone before now. Just me." Cole scoffed, but his voice wavered. "He's just an animal. Animals get confused." "No," Blake replied calmly. "Shadow, Lobar doesn't get confused. He remembers scents, he remembers fear, and he remembers guilt." Cole's jaw tightened. Are you accusing me of something? Blake set the tablet on the table and hit play. The footage began to roll, the SUV crawling down Lily Street long before the official incident. The color drained from Cole's face. He swallowed hard. This isn't... Oh... It's what it looks like. It looks exactly like you were lying, Blake countered. It looks like you were patrolling a street you weren't... Signed to, and your dash cam just so happened to turn off right when things went south? Cole shifted uneasily in his chair, his breathing growing shallow. I told you it malfunctioned. Just then, Daniels entered the room, his arms folded across his chest. That's strange, Daniels said, because the tech guys checked it out this afternoon. No malfunction, no wiring problems. Someone, turned it off by hand. Cole's mouth fell open, but no sound escaped. Shadow took a step closer, his eyes fixed on him. His nose twitched. He knew that smell. The scent of the man who held Lily in her final moments. He remembered her fear. Blake leaned in. Why were you near her house hours before the crash? Why did you fail to report being in... The area! What were you doing there? Cole's voice broke. I was following a lead. What lead? Daniels demanded. Cole averted his gaze, his breath catching in his throat. I can't say. A sharp bark from Shadow made him jump. Blake's eyes grew cold. Can't, he said slowly, or won't. Cole finally met his stare, and in that instant, Blake understood. He wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting someone else. And that someone was still out there. For hours, Shadow had been silent, lying at Blake's feet, as the long interrogation of Cole dragged on. But the second Blake entered the evidence room to inspect items from the SUV, a switch flipped inside the dog. His ears perked, his body went rigid, and his nose shot into the air, catching a scent only he could perceive. Blake saw it at once. You smell something, boy? Shadow didn't respond. He launched himself toward a shelf piled high with sealed evidence bags, desperately clawing at one on the middle shelf. Nearby officers flinched back in shock as Blake rushed forward. His eyes narrowed on the label, E47 recovered from Cole's trunk, unidentified fabric. Shadow whined a loud, pleading sound, pawing at the plastic, begging Blake to open it. The dog's anguish was raw, a tremor running through him, absolutely undeniable. Blake shared a look with Daniels. Open it, he commanded. A technician cut the seal. The instant it was open, Shadow shoved, his nose inside. He then unleashed a piercing, shattered howl that echoed through the silent room. It was the kind of cry you only hear when a partner finds a lost soul or the last piece of them left behind. Inside the bag lay a small scrap of glittery pink fabric, a torn piece of a little girl's dress, Lily's dress. Daniels let out a sharp breath. This wasn't in the original report. Blake's hands shook as he took the fabric. Her mother told me the dress, Satz, she wore that day was brand new. There were no tears in it. Shadow gently nudged the cloth, inhaling with deep, frantic breaths. And then his head snapped toward the door, and he erupted in a furious volley of barks. Blake's brow furrowed. You want us to follow again, but Shadow shot into the hall. Daniels rushed behind him. He's on a trail. Something, a scent from that cloth. The dog sprinted through the corridors, tearing down the stairwell and bursting out the back exit of the station. The night air struck them like an icy slap. Shadow never slowed, his nose locked to the ground. He wasn't following Lily's scent. He was tracking something or someone who had been terrifyingly close to her. Shadow skidded to a stop behind the station right by the dumpsters. He barked sharp and urgent at a dark corner of the lot, a place where officers often smoked or made private calls. Blake's flashlight beam cut across the ground, his breath caught in his throat. A set of footprints smudged but there leading, away from the station. Daniels dropped to one knee beside them. These aren't Cole's boots. Shadow lowered his head, a growl rumbling deep. In his chest, someone else had been with Lily before she died. Someone who left a trail. Someone who was still so close to the department. A chill seized Blake's heart. This wasn't just Cole, he whispered. Shadow let out a single sharp bark. It was absolute. This was bigger, so much bigger. The discovery of that torn piece of Lily's dress changed the entire game. Within the hour, Blake and Daniels stood in the medical examiner's office, Shadow pacing anxiously behind them. The fluorescent lights hummed above, casting a cold, sterile light across the examination room. The very air felt heavy, crushing for a place that was supposed to offer answers. Dr. Harper, the chief medical examiner, stood by a steel table, her gloves already on. Her eyes were weary, troubled. "I reviewed the initial report," she began quietly. "The autopsy was rushed. Far too rushed. They classified her cause of death as blunt force trauma based only on what they could see." She paused, a shadow crossing her face. "There were things I questioned even then, but I was told to sign off. Quickly." Blake shot a sharp look at Daniels. Told by who? Harper hesitated. "Cole. He said the department needed this closed fast." Shadow whined, nudging the table leg with his nose, a wave of restless energy coming off him. Harper opened the other file. The photos, the notes, the cold diagrams of Lily's injuries, but she didn't stop there. She pulled out new scans she had run just that morning, after Blake's urgent request for a second look. She pointed to an image. Here, the bruising pattern on her ribs. Daniels leaned closer. "That's not consistent with a car accident." Harper nodded grimly. "Exactly. These marks," she traced, a gloved finger over the diagram, "are from being gripped hard by an adult's hands." Blake's stomach plummeted. "And these," Harper continued, flipping to another scan, "are compression marks on her upper arms." She met their gaze. She didn't just fall into the road. She was held. Shadow let out a deep, trembling growl, the kind that comes from a place beyond words, a recognition of pure evil. Harper swallowed hard. "There's more." She brought up a magnified image of Lily's neck. Petechiae, burst blood vessels. This is something we see in cases of oxygen deprivation. Someone covered her mouth, or pressed something over her face just before the impact. Daniels took a step back, horrified. "So, she was already unconscious when the SUV hit her." Blake's voice was a strained whisper. "Meaning the car, it wasn't what took her life." Harper nodded slowly. "Correct. The impact from the vehicle did not cause her death. She was gone moments before." Shadow suddenly barked a loud, sharp, insistent sound. He moved to the corner of the room, his claws scraping the linoleum, his nose pressing against a cabinet that contained Lily's personal effects gathered from that terrible scene. Harper's brow furrowed. "That cabinet was locked." Daniel strode forward, unlocking it, and then he just froze. Inside a small pin glittered a police lapel pin, but not Cole's knot from his precinct. Blake felt a cold dread creep up his spine. Someone else had been with Lily, someone with power, someone insulated from the truth. Shadow stared at the pin, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The carefully woven lies were beginning to fray, and the real monster was stepping out of the shadows. The room seemed to drop 10 degrees with the discovery of that single pin. A tiny piece of metal, yet it carried the weight to change everything. Blake turned it over in his palm, his gaze fixed on the finely engraved initials R.A. Daniel's voice was a strained whisper. "That pin, it belongs to Assistant Chief Robert Avery. He's one of the highest-ranking men, officers in the entire department." A knot of ice formed in Blake's stomach. Avery was revered, feared, and utterly untouchable. But the pin here among Lily's things was a silent accusation that could not be ignored or wished away. Shadow paced, the floor, his nose twitching, nudging Blake's leg with an insistent pressure. His eyes pleaded, promising there was more. He hadn't shown them everything yet. "What is it boy wear now?" Blake whispered. Shadow bolted for the door. Daniels and Blake shared a look charged with dread before plunging after him out of the morgue down the sterile hallway and bursting into the concrete expanse of the parking lot. The loyal dog's nose was locked to the pavement, weaving a tapestry from the scent of the pin, the fabric a story no human sense could ever hope to read. With a sudden sharp turn, Shadow veered left, straight toward the restricted section of the lot where the brass parked their cars. Blake's heart hammered against his ribs. "He can't be going for Avery's car." Daniels breathed the words barely audible, but Shadow didn't. Stop at the imposing black SUV. He circled it, sniffed the tires, let out a single dismissive growl, and moved on. Past the lot beyond the station house, toward a forgotten path snaking behind the precinct, a route no one ever took. The narrow trail was choked with weeds leading to an old maintenance shed, a tomb for broken equipment and forgotten files. No cameras, no witnesses. A perfect blind spot. Shadow stopped dead before the rusted metal door, his barks echoing with a desperate, fierce urgency. Blake's hand trembled as it hovered over the handle. "This shed? No one's been in here for years," Daniels said, shaking his head. "Not officially, anyway." Blake shoved the door, and a wave of cold, musty air spilled out. It was dark inside, save for a single, weak light flickering deep within. Dust motes danced in the beam of Blake's flashlight as he crossed the threshold. Shadow shot past him, making a beeline for a large metal locker against the far wall. He clawed at it frantically, his nails screeching on the metal, his barks sounding like a heart being torn in two. Blake wrenched the locker, door open, and his own heart stopped. Inside were things that should never be in a place like this. A child's backpack, a tiny pair of shoes, a cloth stained dark with blood, and a small, worn teddy bear, Lily's favorite. Daniel stepped forward, his face pale with horror. "My God, these were never logged as evidence." Shadow nudged the bear with his nose, a soft whimper escaping him, his eyes mirroring a pure, bottomless grief. Then his head snapped toward a stack of papers jammed behind a toolbox. Blake pulled them free. They were pages of secret communications, unauthorized wiretap logs, and surveillance photos of Lily taken in the days leading up to her death. Daniel's voice finally broke. "This wasn't random. This was an execution." Suddenly, Shadow growled, his eyes fixed on the doorway. They weren't alone. Someone was watching them. Someone who never wanted them to find. This truth, the beam from Blake's flashlight trembled in his hand as a shadow in the doorway detached itself from the darkness. Instinct took over. Daniel moved a human shield between Blake and the door, his hand already a breath away from his weapon. "Holster!" Shadow's growl was a low, guttural promise of violence, a storm gathering in his chest. Someone was out there. Someone who had stalked their every move. Someone who should never have found this place. A single crunch of gravel shattered the silence. A soft breath on the night air, and then Assistant Chief Robert Avery emerged from the darkness. His uniform was perfect, his bearing deceptively calm, but his eyes cold sharp and calculating, fixed on the shed with a chilling intent. "Officers," he began, his voice like polished steel. "What brings you to be digging around on restricted property?" A shard of ice traced its way down Blake's spine. Avery never asked what they'd discovered. He didn't have to. "Sir," Daniel said, choosing his words with care, "we have evidence connected to Lily's case. Evidence that has no business being here." Avery's face remained a mask of stone, not a single muscle twitching. "And then, close the locker and erase from your memory whatever it is you think you found." Shadow erupted in a vicious bark, lunging against the leash, his teeth bared and gleaming. Blake strained to hold him, the dog a whirlwind of snarling fury. Avery merely watched his disdain poorly hidden. "That dog," Avery murmured, has been a nuisance from the very beginning. Blake's fury ignited. Shadow found Lily's belongings. You never thought anyone would find this place, did you? Avery let out a long, theatrical sigh. I attempted to resolve this with discretion. You two were removed from this investigation, and yet here you are, complicating matters. Daniel closed the distance. You were there, the day Lily died. The silence that followed was a confession. Blake's heart hammered against his ribs. Why? Would you have been anywhere near her? A cold, heavy silence stretched between them. Then Avery finally spoke. Cole wasn't working alone. He stated, his calm voice a weapon. He was following my orders. Blake felt the ground give way beneath him. Avery went on, his tone eerily composed. A complaint had been filed against me, an accusation of harassment from Lily's mother. He shook his head. Baseless, of course, but that kind of stain, it ruins careers, families, everything. Daniel could only stare, horrified. So you tried to intimidate her, to threaten her. A smirk touched Avery's lips. I simply instructed Cole to remind her who held the power. Unfortunately, he lost his nerve. The girl fled. It got out of hand. Blake's voice fractured with grief. You covered it all up. Of course I did, Avery replied, his voice devoid of any warmth. For the good of the department. Shadow's barks turned violent, yanking so hard that Blake almost lost his grip on the leash. Avery took one step closer, and in that instant the terrible truth crashed down. Shadow wasn't growling because Avery was guilty. He was growling because he knew Avery's scent. The very same scent from the fabric of Lily's torn dress. The very same scent from the pin hidden in her keepsakes. The scent of the man who had seized her. Lily never ran into the road, at all. She was running for her life. From Avery. And loyal Shadow had known it all along. The second Avery moved, forward Shadow exploded with a ferocity beyond anything they had ever witnessed. Blake fought to control him, the powerful German shepherd. A tempest of snapping jaws and furious snarls. His teeth were bared, every muscle coiled with raw rage. Yet Avery didn't even flinch. He just smirked, raising a hand as if to wave away a bothersome pest. You have no proof, he said calmly. The girl is gone. The case is closed, and you two are far outside your jurisdiction. But Blake wasn't hearing him anymore. He wasn't listening to the words or the thinly veiled threats. His entire focus was on Shadow because the dog's fury wasn't aimed at Avery's face. It was aimed. His growl was fixed on Avery's jacket, his eyes locked on a faint bulge hidden deep within an inner pocket. Daniels whispered urgently, "Check his coat." A flicker in Avery's eyes was all the confirmation they needed. Daniels lunged, but Avery reacted faster. He grabbed his jacket, ripping it open as he sprinted for the shed's only exit. Blake shouted, "Go!" And Shadow exploded forward, claws digging into the dirt, his muscular body launching itself like a living projectile. Avery hit the tree line just behind the shed, but Shadow was impossibly faster. He brought the man down, pinning him. With his entire weight, a deep snarl vibrating inches from Avery's throat. Blake and Daniels arrived moments later, wrestling Avery's arms behind his back. All the while, Shadow growled, refusing to yield until the man's cuffs were finally secured. Something tumbled from Avery's pocket, hitting the dirt with a soft metallic clink. A small pink locket adorned with glittery lilies. With trembling hands, Daniels picked it up. He kept her locket all this time. Avery spat on the ground. She shouldn't have fought back. A vicious, fury-filled bark tore from Shadow, shaking every nerve in Blake's body. But just before Blake could process it, Daniel's radio suddenly crackled. Unit 3 urgent update. You need to get back to the medical center. Immediately. Blake grabbed the radio. What happened? A shaky voice answered. It's about Lily. And Blake's heart froze solid. Minutes later, Shadow and the officers were racing to the medical center. Avery, now in cuffs, was cursing under his breath. Inside the hallway was a whirlwind of frantic nurses and staff. Blake forced his way through the crowd. "Where is she?" he demanded. A doctor stepped forward, his eyes wide with disbelief. We were about to transfer her to the morgue when her fingers twitched. Blake's breath hitched in his throat. Shadow whimpered. "What are you saying, Blake?" whispered his voice, barely audible. The doctor swallowed hard. "Lily is alive." For a moment the world stood still. Shadow let out a soft, broken whine, a sound of both disbelief and joy, and sprinted for the recovery room. Blake followed his own heart, pounding so violently it felt like he couldn't breathe. Inside the small room, Lily lay on a bed, pale but unmistakably breathing. Her eyelids fluttered, and her tiny hand twitched again. Shadow gently climbed up beside her, pressing his wet nose into her palm. Her fingers curled instinctively around his nose. Tears filled Blake's eyes, against all odds, against every lie against the man who tried to silence her forever. Lily was alive. The room was quiet, save for the soft, steady beep of the life support, monitors, and the quiet breaths of a child who wasn't supposed to open her eyes again. Blake remained frozen in the doorway, unable to speak, to think, barely able to process what he was seeing. Lily's small fingers tightened again, curling into Shadow's fur as the devoted dog pressed close against her side, his whole body trembling with relief. "Tanzt her!" Mother burst into the room moments later, falling to her knees with a raw, choked sob. "My baby, my sweet baby," she cried, her hands touching Lily's cheeks. Her hair, her small hands, as if she feared this was all a dream. Her father wrapped his arms around them both, his own silent tears falling down his face. Shadow watched the reunion, his head resting on Lily's shoulder, his entire body rising and falling with deep emotional breaths. For the first time in days, the growling had stopped. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't mourning. He was just here protecting her, like he always had been. Dr. Harper stepped into the room, his heart pounding. "She's weak," she whispered, "but she's stable." The lack of oxygen put her into a profound coma, a state that was almost indistinguishable from death. Had Shadow not acted at the funeral, we would have found out in time. A lump formed in Blake's throat. "He was trying to tell us. He never left her side." Harper nodded. "He saved her." Beyond the hospital room door, officers stood in stunned silence as the news rippled through the precinct. Avery was already in custody, his monstrous crimes laid bare by the evidence from the shed, damning phone records, and Cole's devastating confession. The department was reeling, an entire chain of command shattered by a truth too terrible to imagine. Cole, now a man broken by guilt, finally confessed to Avery's constant threats and manipulation, revealing the staggering depth of the entire cover-up. Daniels approached Blake, his voice low. "Internal Affairs has taken the lead. Avery won't see the light of day again." He cleared his throat. "And Cole? He's cooperating. But he'll face prison time too." Blake let out a slow, heavy breath. "It's finally over then." Daniel shook his head. "No, it's over because of Shadow." Back inside the room, Lily's eyes fluttered open. Her mother choked back a sob, leaning closer. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" Lily blinked, disoriented, but awake. Her gaze traveled slowly across the room until it finally rested on Shadow. A fragile smile formed on her lips. "Shaddy," she whispered, her voice as thin as paper. Shadow's tail thumped softly against the hospital bed. Blake could no longer fight it. He wiped a single tear from his cheek. After all his years on the force, all the harrowing rescues, all the crimes he had solved, nothing had ever felt as profound as this. A child's life reclaimed, a monster brought to justice, and a loyal dog proving yet again that some heroes don't wear a badge, they stand beside those who do. As the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow across the room, Blake whispered, "You did it, Shadow. You brought her back to us." Shadow gently pressed his head against Lily, closing his eyes in peaceful contentment. And for the first time since the nightmare began, everything was finally right with the world.